attempting to connect to audio. Oh, there he is.
Jim, we can't hear you if you're saying anything. You're muted.
And we are streaming. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay, Trustee Gibson, it's all you.
Meeting of the Legislative Advocacy Committee to order. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Are there any public comments on non-agenda items?
I am not aware of any.
Thank you. There were minutes from the previous meeting. Do we need to review them or anything?
Well, I think they were the people who were here are not here, with the exception of and even Trustee Osterling was not here. So I would recommend that we just accept them as a record of the last time the committee met without a formal approval.
Yes. Let's accept the minutes from the previous meeting.
Okay.
The agenda. Under the next category, we have introductions. Yes, we need to do introductions here.
Okay, so what I would like to suggest is Trustee Gibson, how about if the three trustees introduce themselves, and then I'll have our other folks introduce themselves. Or actually, I'm sorry, the four trustees. We have our student trustee here as well. So Trustee Gibson. Great.
My name is Steve Gibson. I represent District 3, live in Pasadena. And so I'm so glad to be here. Started in July, so glad to be here. And I'll be the chair. And next we can have Jim introduce himself.
Thank you, Steve. Jim Osterling. Hi, Dale. Good to see you again. I'm Steve's next door neighbor, representing district seat number 2, the rest of Altadena that is not in Steve's district, plus a little bit of Northeast Pasadena, plus the city of Sierra Madre comprises seat 2. And I was first elected in 2015. And I have previously served on this committee, and I really enjoy serving on this committee because it keeps us up to date what's going on at the statewide level and the national level from a legislation perspective.
Thank you. Alton.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alton Wang, representing Area 7, which is a neighbor to Jim's district, representing the city of Arcadia and parts of the city of Temple City. And I was sworn in this past July. I'm excited to serve on this committee. I have a background doing policy issues, and so this is something that I'm personally very excited about.
Thank you. Manuel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Gomez. I am the student trustee representing all areas of the district. Good to see some of y'all. I think I've met a few of you. Dale, nice to meet you, Carol.
Thank you. Who else needs?
I think it would be great if Dale introduced himself and his colleague, Carol.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having us. My name is Dale Shimasaki. I'm the CEO of Strategic Education Services. We've had the honor and privilege of working with Pasadena Community College District since 2019. And we do a lot of our primary focus is on public education issues here in Sacramento. Let me have Carol Gonzalez introduce herself, and then we can go.
Hi, My name is Carol Gonzalez. I've also been supporting the work since 2019 with Strategic Education Services, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much.
Dale, have we had Carol at a prior legislative subcommittee meeting?
I don't know if we've had her.
Oh.
Is this your first one, Carol?
I've joined previously, but only the ones through Zoom. Yeah.
Well, welcome. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We can move to update on state issues.
Okay, and we will turn that over to Dale.
So I believe since our last meeting, we've had the adoption of the budget in June, and as you know, the biggest changes that were in the state budget for community colleges was the passage and appropriation of funding to provide a permanent hold harmless for the community college system to stave off the negative impacts of declining enrollment. That was probably the biggest dollar allocation and the biggest policy policy proposal that was adopted by the legislature. And the impact of that is helpful for the community colleges because it establishes a floor of funding for in perpetuity to help you with your planning for the upcoming years as we go through and move through the downturn in the economy. The second thing is that there was also an increase in base funding for the community colleges student-centered funding formula, which had never been done since the inception of the formula. On a statewide average, that adjustment is about equivalent to an 8% adjustment in the community colleges. It varies by district because of your different funding levels across the state. So it might be a little bit higher, a little lower, depending where you are compared to the other districts in the state. And then, of course, there is also an increase in the cost of living adjustment of 6.56%, which is also helpful to stave off the negative impacts of inflation that we've been experiencing. There were a number of one-time funding initiatives that took place as well, because, as you know, with the unusual largesse of one-time funding that came into the state budget from capital gains increases, there was availability of funding for a number of proposals ranging from $500,000 to as much as $30 million. So, for example, in the Next Up program, there was a $30 million increase in the program. There were increases in the California College Promise program to make it available to all full-time students. There was funding for technology modernization and data protection for $25 million. Student Equity and Achievement Program for $25 million, foster youth and supportive services for $20 million, and apprenticeship related funding for $16 million. So there were a lot of pots of funding in categorical programs. Much of it is helpful for continuing into the future. And then there's a number of one-time initiatives that are there. And the one-time initiatives will be available for funding over a 3-year time frame.
Dale, can I ask a question? So you said 30 million for Next Step, but then there was also money for foster youth. So there was money for foster youth, former foster youth in 2 different pots.
Yes, foster youth supportive services for 20 million.
Okay, so that is, but that's one time, it's not ongoing.
Right.
And is that getting allocated out according to FTES?
In a lot of these programs that are developing the funding as we speak through guidance, but I believe most of these programs are FTES generated.
Okay.
there are some exceptions that we could get into on that. So on the one-time, some of the other bigger one-time increases was the $834 million for facilities maintenance and instructional equipment. And then there's monies for student retention and one-time funds for student retention enrollment to help you use funds to increase enrollments for and maintain enrollments for community college students. And there's still funds from last year that haven't been fully expended yet. For example, there is a $105 million allocation to implement the Common Core course numbering system that hasn't been expended yet. And then there's $65 million for AB 65, which is to help improve on community college transfers from AB 928 from the Berman bill. So those are some of the key, the primary budget allocations that took place. There is also funding for student housing projects. Many colleges receive $50,000 in a planning grant for student housing. And I believe PCC is one of those colleges that have that.
Yep.
They are starting the process of funding from, there's a select number of projects from last year that were moving along fairly rapidly, and other colleges that they're providing funds for capital outlay for student housing projects. But this is looking to be a continuing source of funding that the legislature strongly believes in, because student housing is, as you know, is a major need and concern for the future. Turning to legislation, let me just share a couple of highlights for you. There's a higher education trailer bill that passed after the budget was adopted. It contains a couple of important provisions. One is provided some clarification on how to allocate the money for student housing. But the second piece was it provided some additional information and provisions for the provision of the $200 million in community college funding for part-time faculty health insurance. And the new trailer bill language specifies that after all the colleges submit their reimbursement claims for part-time faculty health insurance, and the initial amounts of funds are distributed, if there are funds left over in this $200 million pot, the monies will be reallocated. The leftover monies will be reallocated to the districts who've claimed the funds to begin with. There is a possibility, we're not sure yet, that not all districts will participate in the program. So this provision was put in to specify how to use these monies if not all districts claim a reimbursement for the program. And it is expected that this bill will be signed by the governor in the upcoming month.
But Dale, that bill doesn't specify, because under the adjunct office hours, we knew we got 8 cents on the dollar that we spent.
Correct.
So there's no calculation in there, even for the initial
correct
expenditure.
Right. And we, when you go back to the statewide state chancellor's website on guidance for this program and how the funds will be allocated and who's going to get what, it says the guidance is forthcoming this month. So there hasn't been a posting yet. But obviously when the posting comes up, we will inform you and advise you of what the chancellor's office has determined.
Sorry, Dale. So on that, so on that same point, the trailer bill does not contain language on the reimbursement. So that's going to be determined by the chancellor's office?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
And the guidance on that.
And Dale, another question on that one, is that one time or ongoing?
That's intended to be an ongoing program.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Mhm.
And Dale, if I could go all the way back to your first point, which was the permanent safe harbor, which is great. Do you know what the base year is going to be for the permanent safe harbor?
I had it somewhere. I'll have to get back to you. I forgot the base year. I have it.
Okay.
Let me see
All
here.
right. Thank you.
Yeah, but let me get that.
And
to you.
then, yeah, and then for Steve and Alton's benefit, when Dale talks about statewide numbers for this, that, and the other, as a rough rule of thumb, what I do is I take 2% is usually what PCC gets when it's something like, when it's based on apportionment or FTES. That's roughly our percentage of the statewide whole. Now, this last item he was talking about, which would be for the adjunct faculty healthcare benefits, that would not be allocated that way, to be allocated based on who submitted. But a lot of these statewide numbers, when you hear the total number, just figure roughly 2% for PCC when you hear the total number.
Right. That's a good rule of thumb to help you get an estimate of how the state funds get allocated to you. That's a good way of doing it.
That's assuming that they're using our hold harmless number, and hopefully they are, versus our actual
Yeah.
FTS right now. In some cases they are,
Right.
in some cases they aren't, but I don't think there's any clarity about which case we're falling in right now.
So turning to legislation, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Carol, you distributed the list of legislation that we had been following. And these are primarily bills that we had been monitoring this legislative session for on behalf of PCC. AB 102 is the Holden bill on dual enrollment to make the dual enrollment program a permanent program. It had a sunset date in the bill, and it kept getting extended. And rather than just extending it from time to time, they repealed the sunset date and made the program permanent. So we won't be left in uncertainty as well. Is the program continuing? Is it not continuing? What do we do about going forward on the program? The second one is on AB 1187 to provide apportionment funding for community college tutoring programs. This is a bill that is introduced by Jackie Irwin, and there is funding in the budget for this already, but this bill gives the statutory authorization for the continuation of the funding. By the way, just to clarify that the funding in the budget was only using one-time funds, so we would have to go for a subsequent allocation for next year, but it is hoped that we try to build this in as a permanent allocation as ongoing funding for the community college system. AB 1505 is a bill on the full-time faculty obligation. This would reset the full-time faculty obligation for community colleges. The Chancellor's Office of the Community Colleges estimated that rebenching the FON, as it's more commonly known, would result in an unfunded mandate of $400 million. So this bill went through the process, but it was held in the Senate Appropriations Committee, primarily due to the cost issue and the unavailability of ongoing funding to be able to support this measure. AB 1655 would make Juneteenth a state holiday that would authorize local education agencies and the state of California to take Juneteenth off as a formal state holiday. As you know, President Biden designated this as a federal holiday. This bill would make it a state holiday and applicable to not just the state, but also local education agencies. AB 1705 is a measure that is a follow-up to AB 705 regarding the matriculation process. And this bill is going through had made it to the governor's desk. And it is expected that the governor will sign this measure to help assist students improve and improve their chances of getting through transfer level courses in English and mathematics. AB 1746 by Assemblymember Medina did not make it to the governor's desk, and the reason for that is that the contents of the bill to make the Cal Grant reform proposal, make the Cal Grants more available and accessible to low-income students, all those provisions were inserted into the budget. And because all those provisions were inserted into the budget, this bill did not move. The sticking point in the budget, however, is that these provisions aren't automatically funded yet. There is language in the Cal Grant Reform Program to expand the eligibility and to make the program more accessible for low-income students will be contingent on the availability of funding as determined by the Department of Finance. So if there's more significant increase in funding for expansion of the Cal Grant program, then the money will follow, but only at the say-so of the go-ahead of the Department of Finance. The Santiago bill was a bill that was, the Santiago bill was trying to make to put part-time employees on par with full-time employees in terms of their hourly rate for salaries. This bill did not make it in out of the first house of the legislature. I think it was primarily due to cost considerations and the unavailability of funding to support this proposal. Next. AB 1919 is a youth transit pilot program to provide free youth transit passes as a pilot project for local transit agencies. And this bill has a lot of momentum and support going through the legislature. The big question on this is if the governor does sign the bill, is how quickly could funding be made available for the project. The way the bill is structured now, it won't take effect until January 1st of 2023. And currently there's no funding in the budget for it. So if it gets signed, the earliest it could probably get implemented is in the 2023 budget. But because there's a lot of interest statewide in supporting this program, I think if the governor does sign the measure, there will be some efforts to make sure that funding's provided in the state budget for it. On AB 1942, it provides.
Dale, could I
yes.
could I interrupt and ask a question on 1919?
Yes. Yes.
So, assuming that Governor Newsom signs this, and assuming that there is funding, the earliest it would be implemented would be January of 2023?
Unless the budget puts it in, then it could be as early as July 1st, 2023.
Oh, 2023.
Yeah, and July 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And then a follow-up question for Erica. Erica, I know that we're using COVID funds right now to help our students out with their transit pass. When do those funds expire? We have to expend those by a certain date.
We have to expend all of our COVID money by June 30th, 2023, at least right now. I would not be surprised to see that extended because I think a lot of colleges are struggling to spend their money. So we're working with that deadline, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it extended.
Okay, so if it wasn't extended, in our best case, it would smoothly transition into July 1st, 2023 funds from the state from AB 1919, but it might be after that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Sorry, another question on this bill. With this, so this, what I see here on this document is that this bill will only be eligible for those 18 years of age or younger to access.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, and that was a sticking point in the bill as it was moving through. But the author's office has indicated additional discussions on that issue for next year. So if the bill gets through.
Oh, Emmanuel's hand.
Is there a list of which local transit line would be a part of this?
Well, because it's a pilot program and it wouldn't be available to all transit agencies, what the Department of Transportation would do is issue an RFP or a grant, ask for proposals for the different transit agencies to submit a proposal for funding. Because not everyone will get funded as a pilot. They'll be selecting a select number, and the number of transit agencies that will be selected will depend on how much funding they put into this. So that's what the big variable is going to be.
Thank you.
If I may add, when we first supported the bill was intended to support transit passes for community college students, CSU and UC students. Thereafter, It was amended to include those 25 and younger, and closer to the last few committees, it was amended to 18 and younger.
yeah, this one we had a lot of hope for, but it got chipped away, and now it won't do us any good, correct?
Yeah, it
Correct.
got watered down.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I was getting excited here. We've been fighting so hard for
Yes.
so long, but not this time.
Yes.
Okay.
But when we come up, and just to circle back to what Carol was saying, when it does come up for funding in the budget, that's where we have an opportunity to see if we could amend that provision to go to 25. So on the next bill, AB 1942 is funding for instructional service agreements with public safety agencies. And this bill is at the governor's desk. The bill is sort of a carve out, if you will, for lack of a better term, to provide special funding for those colleges who offer public safety training or retraining through instructional service agreements. And our district, as well, a couple others were opposed to this measure because number one, there was a recommendation in the student-centered funding formula task force that if you're going to fund instructional service agreements, it should be for all programs, not just a limited carve-out as public service agencies. But second, as Erica would tell you, that for some districts and colleges, this is a windfall. It doesn't, the distribution of these funds has no relationship to the cost being borne by community colleges to operate these programs.
And I'll give a practical example why we're opposed to, well, a couple of things, and Dale's already commented on it, that the student-centered funding formula task force specifically said it's not okay that this just refers to public service agencies because there are other instructional service agreements out there. But the other issue is that, well, there are a couple of issues. The first is, so a lot of police and fire departments do not have a training or professional development budget. They don't have anything. And part of the reason that the state has gotten away with not giving any money out is for many years, community colleges have provided that professional development to people who are already sworn police officers or they're already in the fire service. This isn't training for police. I want to be really clear. This is not training to become a police officer or training to become a firefighter. It is you're already in the job and you have to do ongoing professional development. The state it really hasn't been funding it. So what happens is those local agencies contract with a local community college to provide that ongoing professional development. And what they do is, because these are in career technical areas, for the most part, the minimum qualification that a person has to have is an associate's degree plus 6 years of experience. So in most cases, the person who's providing the instruction is actually the training officer in that agency. So it'll be the training officer in Pasadena PD or in Pasadena Fire Department. What happens is they're the instructor of record. They provide the training at their site. So in the Pasadena Police Department, they would provide this training at their police department. The college would enroll the students and no money changes hands because it's what's called an instructional service agreement. So the police department is not paying for the instruction on behalf of those folks, but the college is also not paying for the instructor. So there's no faculty cost. That training officer is paid as a training officer. This is part of their daily duty. What the college then does is collect all the FTES apportionment as though they delivered that class on their campus and they paid the faculty member. So part of the issue that we have is a larger global issue, and that is the student-centered funding formula is written as though it's a blank check. You serve more students, they do better, you get more money out of the formula. But as we know, the system budget is a pie. It's a pie. So it's not an unending amount of money. So if, for example, this goes through, College of the Canyons has a large, well, I'll use ELAC. I'll use East LA College. East LA College does a ton of this type of training for police departments and fire departments. They have for years. 3,500 full-time equivalent students or their allocation is funded through these ISA contracts. So they're getting an allocation for 3,500 FTES when they've spent zero money on that instruction. And because they got that money, there's less money available in the formula to pay all the other colleges who actually did expend money for the training. And that gets to the second point, and that is that the task force, the student-centered funding task force, when we talked about it as CEOs, one of the things we all said was, you can't, kind of mess around with the formula. If we're going to go through hold harmless, and if hold harmless is going to be in, 24, 25, that's what's going to set the benchmark, that's going to set the floor. You can't between now and then say, because right now in the student-centered funding formula, these ISAs are funded at 50%. So they're not full funded, they're at 50%. The colleges that have them want them to be funded at the full amount, so they get full payment out of the funding formula, even though they've spent nothing. So it is a problem from a couple of angles. Number one, it messes with a formula that still has never been fully implemented, and colleges have had to live by it. And it rewards colleges that have these ISA contracts and gives them money for doing basically nothing on their campus. So that's why we've taken an opposed position, not because that training isn't important, because the training is important. Those police departments and fire departments should be properly funded to do their professional development. But in the event that they're not, then just leave the funding at 50%. I don't have any heartache over 50% funding for those classes because it's really important training. But I have heartache over them getting full FTES for no cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But Dale, do you think the governor's going to sign this?
The bill was moved, the bill was significantly watered down in the Senate Senate Appropriations Committee to basically be a study or an analysis of this issue. But that's sort of the problem is, and in that sense, it's like not as harmful or damaging. But the problem with that is it sort of gives an opening to bring the issue back again in a couple of years. And I think it'd be better not to study and restudy this issue over and over again. I think we should just sort of, as a state policy, a decision should be made. Just if there's not enough funding to support all of this, we shouldn't do it at all. Because all it does is it's just sort of a thorn in the side of the community colleges to get this done. The other fundamental problem with this kind of thing is because it only helps a select number of districts, and we have scarce resources, our next dollar should be spent on helping all the colleges equally, not just a select few. Because if you do the former, you have winners and losers. And I think we're trying to lift up the whole system from a statewide policy perspective, not benefit a few colleges at the expense of others. So,
Alton, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it sounds like the districts that benefit would want this to go through, and then obviously, Erica's position makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
But where are other community college bodies on this? Whether it's anything from the chancellor's office to other statewide, or where are other folks on this bill? And then I asked that to say, like, where's the governor getting pressure from?
So it gets back to where you stand depends on where you sit. So the ones who are supporting it are those who have ISAs and stand to benefit. So obviously LA Community College is supporting this bill. Los Rios Community College, because they don't have a very big public safety program, but they have a very big career technical and education program. They don't like the bill. South Orange County Community College District, they're opposed because they didn't include the career technical education programs. There are a number of sheriff and police associations that are in support of the bill. Interestingly, in the last hearing in the policy committee, there were 3 counties, Santa Barbara, Bakersfield, and I forgot the other, but there are 3 county governments that were opposed to the bill. And I'm not sure why they were opposed, but they all came on via phone call to call in their opposition to the bill.
And I can tell you that when I was the Dean of Career Tech at Santa Barbara City College, I had the ISAs with the local fire department and the local police department. They were small, but I don't know. They would be interesting to know what their issue is.
And we could forward to you through Erica and Alex the list of supporters and opposition in the last analysis that was posted. So so you can see for yourself where they are.
And very quickly, it was Kern, Placer, and Santa Barbara.
So okay.
Kern is interesting.
Where does San Francisco City College and the city and county of San Francisco, what's their position?
As I recall, they didn't take a position, but I could double check. As I recall,
Okay.
they didn't weigh in on the bill. So,
All right, just curious.
Yeah, they're kind of overlapping with the county. And so they're kind of in mesh there. So that might be why they didn't take a position.
and in general, City College of San Francisco has had a different set of priorities
Mhm.
that they've had to deal with over the past several years. So they haven't weighed in on many pieces of legislation over the past few years because of their other situation related to accreditation and their severe enrollment loss that they're still trying to recover from.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, next.
And they still have guaranteed revenue, right, for FTES?
Yes. Yeah,
And
I think
so I don't think they want to draw too much attention because they're getting a lot of money, even though they don't have the enrollment.
right. Yeah, their per FTES amount is clearly an outlier right now.
Yeah.
So just last couple of bills, SB 1141. There's this is a modification of the calculation for residency for non-resident tuition purposes. In the case of community college students, as you know, because we're a 2-year program, and we're only around here for 2 years, there's a situation where community colleges can only count 2 years of full-time attendance in credit courses to qualify for residency for tuition status purposes. And the threshold, however, to be considered a resident is 3 years. So what happens to a lot of community college students, they have to take 2 years of credit courses and 1 year of non-credit courses. And that's an aberration in the community college system, so that what this bill tried to do was try to conform it to be 2 years to match the community college is 2 year residency and 2 years attendance in the community college system. So this bill made it to the governor's desk. There's a lot of support to try to make this change to help basically AB 540 students get to residency status more quickly. The final bill was a bill signed, I believe, by the governor already, and it's to create a joint powers authority for Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena for the purposes of housing to assist the homeless population and families of extremely low and very low moderate income levels. And we were tracking this because it affects your region. So it creates this housing trust to fund planning and zoning for housing and to receive public and private funding for that purposes. So I think we put this in there, and we're tracking it just because it affected your region, and it affects obviously potentially many of your students that are attending PCC. So the governor has up to September 30th to sign or veto legislation. Bills that are non-urgency take effect January 1st, and urgency take effect. I don't think on this list there's any urgency bills, but if there were an urgency bill, it would take effect the day that he signs the measure. And then just looking at the calendar going forward, you have the election in November. On the first Monday in December, which I believe is December 5th, the legislature comes back to Sacramento and reconvenes the next legislative session. They formally adopt rules of procedure and how to operate, and they formally elect the Speaker of the Assembly and the President pro tem of the Senate. And then after they adopt the rules, they generally go home, and then they will come back on January 2nd to start the official session. Going into this next legislative session, I think in your district, there's much more stability compared to other parts of the state. We have 120 members of the legislature. It is anticipated that there will be between 30 and 40 new members of the legislature because of the reapportionment. We're experiencing, this will be the first year of reapportionment. As you know, there are many members of the legislature that retired. There are some members got moved to new districts and they find themselves running against another incumbent from another area. So there are going to be, and then there's some districts that were formed that there is no current incumbent sitting in it. So there are going to be a lot of changes. In the assembly, the chair of the Higher Education Committee retired, Jose Medina. The K-12 chair also retired, Patrick O'Donnell from Long Beach. The Senate Education Chair, Connie Leyva, she did not choose to run again, so she could run for supervisor in San Bernardino County. So there are a lot in education itself. There will be a lot of changes in policy priority shifts depending on who the chair is and who the members of the committee are. So there will be a lot of just cultural change in the policy direction. And there hasn't been any indication from the remaining members of the legislature of who will be the next chair or who wants to be the next chair of these committees. So it is something to watch for. And we will let you know as we get information, we will be sure to share it with you and let you know what's happening. Now, with that, why don't we open up for if there's further discussion and comment.
Yeah, any questions or discussion?
Are there, I mean, obviously this was a really helpful update from this past session, so I really appreciate this. Thank you. Are there any things that we're expecting that we may want to pay attention to? Obviously, I mean, the election has to happen first and they have to get sworn in first, but are there things that are percolating in terms of what might come in the next session?
So the big thing that we will track is the legislative analyst will issue a report on the revenue picture for next year, which is an important report because it'll give us an indicator of how much new revenue will be available to fund Prop 98. So, so that's something we'll look at. The last revenue report showed that revenue estimates were down by about $3 billion compared to the July estimates. That's not a lot in terms of the $200+ billion we're spending, but it's going in the wrong direction. So we want to be careful of that. And as you've been following the economy with the issues of inflation and the stock market, that will affect our state budget as well, because if the stock market continues to be strong, then capital gains taxes will continue to be strong for California. If it goes the other way, it goes, it's a problem. So in November, when the LAO issues that report, we immediately do prepare an update for you to let you know what the economic conditions are going to be for the upcoming year. In terms of, and then I think when the leadership is solidified for the legislature and they appoint the chairs, that'll be the next marker that we'll see. I haven't heard about anything about any major legislative proposals coming up because I think everyone's waiting for the governor to act on what he wants to do this year with the bills. And what we sort of look for in this month are the bills, not so much the bills he signs, but the bills he vetoes. So we could learn from what is it that he wants, what is it that he thinks is important. So for example, if there were a veto of the AB 1919, the transportation measure on student transit passes, we'll learn from that. And in his veto message, we'll learn why he didn't like it and what can be done to improve on it for next time around. Because members don't like to have their bills vetoed, and they will try to find a way to get it through one way or the other. And particularly, and you folks are close to Mr. Holden, that's transportation is one of his key priority areas, and I don't think he wants to leave the legislature without trying to address this issue.
Mm-mm.
Thanks. Other questions or comments?
Thank you, Dale.
Seeing none, it looks like we can move the agenda. Meeting schedule agenda.
Well, we have, I would say, do you have legislative planning or priorities that you want to raise that could come up at a future meeting? Is that, did you want to offer something? Because that so this committee hasn't met that often. We usually meet in January before the legislative convention that happens at the end of January. That's held by the Community College League of California. So we usually have met in January to talk about what we're going to talk to our legislators about. And we often will talk about the federal things because there is the Association of Community College Trustees Legislative Summit that happens in February. So if we wanted to have another meeting this fall, we could start to talk about the kinds of things that we'll want to be pushing for in January.
Yeah, I think it could be useful to have another meeting. We'll then presumably know what was signed, which of these bills were signed and which were vetoed. I'd like to put federal legislation on the agenda. So that's, we could, a lot of big things have happened in the last couple of months on the federal level. So yeah, so I would be interested in one additional meeting this year, if possible.
Okay.
We could schedule that for sometime in October because that would be after the governor's veto or signatures on the bills. So we could schedule that in October and go from there. And also look at when we want to meet in January to talk about things. And depending on what items on the federal agenda you want to talk about, we also could bring in some expertise for that too.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion or future agenda items or anything?
Just on the future agenda items, I saw the thread with Steve and then Erica. When we do set up that meeting for October, let's get those items on the agenda.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Emmanuel, did you have?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, should we consider meeting in November or following the election?
Sure, we could do that. Whatever you all would prefer. Just let us know and we will do the appropriate doodle poll. October or November, whichever.
Yeah, I agree. I think November sounds fine.
Okay, we will do it for November then. All right, awesome.
Sounds good.
So this will be sometime after November 8th and before Thanksgiving,
Yes.
I'll suggest. Okay. So we can doodle poll that.
Okay.
Great.
I think we've gone through the agenda items.
We have.
Thank you so much, Dale, and thanks, and Carol, and thanks for all the great reports and information.
It was a pleasure meeting you folks.
Yeah. Thank you, Dale and Carol. That was super informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, awesome.
Thanks, folks.
Okay.
We're adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.